darkness of our unknowing and the dusk of our dreaming, come we now from far places. Come we now into the twilight of our awakening and the reflection of our gathering. Come we now, all together, we bring unilluminated our dark caves of doubting. We seek unbedazzled the clear light of understanding. Let the sparks of our joining together kindle our resolve, brighten our spirits, reflect our love, and unshadow our days. Come we now, enter the dawning. Our opening hymn is number 108 in the gray hymnal, My Life Flows On. Spirit of life, the beginning of the holiday season is filled with temptations to conspicuous consumptions and pleas for generosity. The contrast between the values represented by this time of year and our ability to fulfill them remind us how great the distance can be between aspirations and actions. The month of December begins with the observance of World AIDS Day, and Human Rights Day follows. They remind us of those at home and abroad who are imprisoned by disease, poverty, and discrimination. The messages of liberation, of dignity, and of joy that come with Hanukkah and with Christmas are hard to hear unless they are conveyed by gracious acts of outreach to those who suffer. Our prayer this day, then, is that we may be gentle with ourselves and with others, as we do our best to navigate through the tricky shoals of December, indeed the tricky shoals of human life. May we avoid being so distracted with our own problems and duties this year that we forget the wider web of life of which we are a part. May we go about our rounds of preparations and festivities with a light heart and with boundless patience. May the dissatisfactions that are part of our lot be our companions, but not our masters, as we cross that holiday threshold. And may all the joys of this season be ours this time around. Amen. Your gifts for the work of this congregation and for the Ebola Relief Fund will be received with gratitude at this time. Thank you. Two summers ago, I was at General Assembly in Louisville, Kentucky, and I went through the place where all the people set up the things to sell and information booths and so on, which I've forgotten the name of, but at any rate, I ran across this small booth with a label on it that said "Final Exit," and it took me by surprise, and I wondered what Final Exit was about. So I stopped and I talked to the people there, who explained to me what Final Exit was all about. And I said, "Oh, you know, we just had a vote about death with dignity and assisted suicide in Massachusetts, and it was defeated. But I said, we probably would want to get involved in a conversation about that at our church sometime. Maybe I could get some literature." And the woman there said, "Why don't we send a speaker and let you know what Final Exit is about, and also what some of the issues are?" And so Judy Snyderman is here with us today from Final Exit. She wrote to us that her earliest interest in death with dignity started when she gained firsthand knowledge of how terminally ill patients had been kept alive in intensive care units, often in pain and with no say in their treatment. She knew she never wanted to be in that position. Nobody does. No quality of life, no control over your bodily functions, no dignity, and no contribution to society. She knew there had to be a better way. She joined the Hemlock Society sometime in the 1970s, and then the Final Exit Network in 2005. And she was elected to the board of the Final Exit Network in 2008, and then to the position of treasurer, which I think she still holds, in 2010. She feels very fortunate to have the opportunity to work in close contact with others who are as dedicated to the right to die with dignity as she is. And as for personal history, she grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, graduated from Goucher College with a BA in mathematics. You can see when they ask you, what good is a BA in mathematics? You can say you can go out and speak to people about death with dignity. It works. And then from the University of Baltimore with an MBA. She now lives in Madison, Wisconsin, but she visits with her sister, Linda, who is here with us today, at the holidays, and so we were very fortunate to have her come to speak with us today, and I want to welcome Judy Snyderman.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. I think that Reverend Bogue already explained why me. It was what I saw of patients in the 80s that I said, I don't want to live like that. And so I joined Hemlock. How many of you have heard of Hemlock? How many of you know it no longer exists? Yes, Hemlock decided to change their name to End of Life Choices. And then they merged with Compassion and Dying Federation and became Compassion and Choices. How many of you have heard of Compassion and Choices? There are 3 organizations in the U.S. that work toward the goal of death with dignity. The largest is Compassion and Choices. They are about 40,000 members. They have 3 offices, and they work mainly at the point of educating people. They have all sorts of educational material on their website. They will go to court for someone whose advance directives are not being followed, and they do very good work. But if you're living a very poor quality, painful life, they cannot help you. They will tell you to stop eating and drinking. And I can tell you that is not a very pleasant way to die. There's an organization called Death with Dignity. Death with Dignity is about 8,000 members, and they work at the political level, at state legislatures. And they were very much behind the passage of the Death with Dignity law in Vermont very recently. And then there's Final Exit Network. We are the smallest of these organizations. We are about 3,000 members. We get our name from the book, Final Exit, written by Derek Humphrey. Have any of you heard of this book? Good. It's still available in libraries and from Derek's website. The book was published in 1991. It stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for about 18 weeks. And it was really surprising in a way that Derek was able to do this, because the book gave very specific directions on how to hasten your death, specific drugs, and he talked a lot about the helium method, which is what we suggest to people. Now, I'm sure most of you know that in 1998, Oregon became the first state to have a death with dignity law. That law was done by a referendum of the people and has been upheld twice since then. The law has its limits. You must be over 18. You must ask the doctor twice, verbally, once in writing. You must have a terminal disease, which they define as being within 6 months of death. And you must tell your next of kin that you have requested lethal medication. Now, most people think that pain is the main reason people want to hasten their death. And you hear people on the other side of the argument say, well, if we just provided more palliative care, we wouldn't need to hasten death. But that's really not the case. There was a study done in Oregon asking people why they had requested the lethal medication. 91% said loss of autonomy. They couldn't determine their own actions. 84% said loss of dignity. 56% losing control of bodily functions. And only 21% said pain. So when people say to you, well, if we could just solve the pain issue, we wouldn't have people wanting to hasten their death, that's just not the case. So that was 1998. In 2008, Washington became the next state, and that was also done by a referendum of the people. Montana followed in 2009, and that was a judicial decision. I think it was Compassionate Choices who took a case to court, and the ruling was that there was nothing in the Montana Constitution that prevented a doctor prescribing lethal medication. In 2013, we had Vermont. And Vermont was interesting because this was the first time it was done through legislation. The government of Vermont actually passed the law. Last year we had Quebec, which is a bit surprising to some of us because they're a very Catholic province. But there was a legislator there who was very dedicated, and over a period of 10 years of hearings and panels, did succeed in getting the legislature to pass a death with dignity law in Quebec. As you all know, Massachusetts defeated the law, but it will come up again. And also in New Jersey, there was a death with dignity law just passed by the legislature, but Chris Christie said he will not sign it. And that's where we stand today. So what are your choices if you want to hasten your death? And that was the title of my talk, Dying in the Age of Choice. Well, you can stop eating and drinking, and that's a very poor, painful way to die. If you have a terminal disease, you can go into hospice, and that's very good. Hospice does a really nice job most of the time. You can move to Oregon, as Brittany Maynard just did, but that is really an unusual case. Usually, the doctors in Oregon will not prescribe for someone who moved there simply for the purpose of dying. Well, then there's final exit. And we accept people who have a disease that will eventually be terminal. They do not have to be within 6 months of death. But if they have Parkinson's or ALS or a lethal cancer, and they will eventually die from that disease, we will accept them into the exit program. Or if they have intractable pain, pain that simply cannot be cured by drugs except a sufficient dose of morphine to end your life. And then there are a constellation of things that older people have that just make their life miserable. Perhaps it's macular degeneration. Perhaps it's arthritis. Whatever it is, their lives are not the quality they want. And we will work with those people as well. And so we see a lot of ALS, a lot of Parkinson's, a lot of cancer, and a lot of Alzheimer's. Now let me give you an example. Let's say you're 70 years old. You're a widow or widower. You've been active. You want to leave money to your children, and you've been given a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Under that circumstances, how many of you would think about hastening your death? Anybody? Couple? Okay. Here's another example. You're 40 years old and you have ALS. You've been told you have 5 years to live and that you will eventually lose all motor function in your muscles. Would anyone want to hasten their death under that circumstance? Food for thought. And one more example. Let's say you're 35 years old and you've been in a motorcycle accident and you will be a quadriplegic for the rest of your life. How many of you would have to think seriously about not wanting to live under those conditions? A few. Well, these are all conditions that are accepted by Final Exit Network. And let me tell you how we work. If someone has intractable pain or a disease that will cause their death, or what we call now a completed life, they're old, they ache, life has lost its quality, and they feel their life is complete, they apply to Final Exit Network. We ask that they do a couple things. They send us a letter stating why they want to hasten their death. They send us a doctor's report, and it doesn't have to be like this. It can be one page, the result of the last visit to the doctor stating what the conditions are. And we ask that they have an interview with one of our trained interview people who will talk with them about how fast their disease is progressing, why they want to hasten their death, and most importantly, how their family feels about their hastening their death. Because the lawsuits that we have gotten into have always been a disgruntled family member who didn't know that the beloved cousin or sister or brother was planning to hasten their death, who was left out of the process and became very angry with us. The paperwork that is submitted is sent to our medical committee, which is a committee of 3 physicians. They will turn down the case or give a provisional acceptance. And almost everyone is accepted because they're screened out before they get to this point. And then an exit guide is assigned. Now, I am also an exit guide. An exit guide will call and talk with the person, tell them the equipment they need to purchase, very simple things that are readily available, and the exit guide will visit with the person. Make sure they have the correct equipment, make sure they know how to use it, and just in general get to know the person. That will be the first time that we have had physical contact with the applicant. We will then say to them, whenever you're ready, let us know. There is no pressure at all for these people to hasten their death quickly. Sometimes people will do so in a week, sometimes 5 years. I now have 2 cases where it's going on 5 years of people who are ready, have the equipment, know what to do, and all they have to do is call us. And having this knowledge and this power is great peace of mind for these people who have been so miserable. And they will usually go on living longer. And that's been the case in Oregon as well. Once people know they have the ability to end their life, they're very content to live longer. They know they have an out when they need it. And in Oregon, about 2/3 of the people who request the lethal medication use it. Some die a natural death, some change their minds. And we see about the same thing. About 2/3 of the people who are accepted into our exit guide program do not use it. Now, I have some literature out in the reception area, and I want to tell you what it is. First is the brochure for Final Exit Network. And it has on it an application for membership. Membership is $50 a year for a single or $75 a year for a couple. And I urge you to join, not because you're necessarily ready to exit, but because we all should support the right of people to have a death with dignity, a dignified death. And then I have some newsletters. Our newsletter comes out quarterly, and there's some newsletters on the table in there as well. And then I also have this document, copies of this document. This comes from the United Methodist Board of Global Ministries, and I call it an advanced directive medical worksheet. How many of you have durable power of attorney for health care? How many have living wills? Not quite enough, not everybody. This is a worksheet that can certainly help give you directions to the person who has your durable power of attorney, or start a conversation with your parents or your children. It has 3 columns across the top. Situation A, there is reasonable hope that I can return to my previous state of health. Situation B, there is little or no chance. And situation C, I have severe brain damage, which would make me unable to recognize people or make rational decisions. And then down the left side is a series of treatments: CPR, mechanical ventilation, nutrition, surgery, dialysis, chemotherapy, blood or blood products, antibiotics, painkillers. And under each situation, you check whether you would want it, you would not want it, or you're undecided. And you can fill out one of these worksheets. It's not a legal document, but it can be a great guide for the person who has your durable power of attorney, because now they know exactly what you want and don't want, and they don't have to guess. And it's also a great conversation opening with your family. And there are copies of this and the brochure and the newsletter in the refreshment area. So I will close by saying thank you. I wish you all a good life and a good death.
We're going to sing one of my favorite Advent songs, People Look East, number 226. Thank you, Judy.